Welcome back to reading Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. Today we're going to be reading chapters 3 and 4. I'll read the last paragraph that we left off on. I was sick exceedingly and dizzy and faint, and thus compelled perforce to accept lodgings under his roof. He told Zillah to give me a glass of brandy, and then passed on to the inner room, where she condoled with me on my sorry predicament, and having obeyed his orders, whereby I was somewhat revived, ushered me to bed. While leading the way upstairs, she recommended that I should hide the candle and not make a noise, for her master had an odd notion about the chamber she would put me in, and never let anybody lodge there willingly. I asked the reason. She did not know, she answered. She had only lived there a year or two, and had so many queer goings-on, she could not begin to be curious. Too stupefied to be curious myself, I fastened my door and glanced around for the bed. The whole furniture consisted of chair, a clothes-press, and large oak case, with squares cut out near the top, resembling coach windows. Having approached the structure, I looked inside and perceived it to be a singular sort of old-fashioned couch, very conveniently designed to obviate the necessity for every member of the family having a room to himself. In fact, it formed a little closet, and the ledge of a window which it enclosed served as a table. I slid back the paneled sides, got in with my light, pulled them together again, and felt secure against the vigilance of Heathcliff and everyone else. The ledge where I placed my candle had a few mildewed books piled up in one corner, and it was covered with writing scratched on the paint. This writing, however, was nothing but a name repeated in all kinds of characters, large and small. Catherine Earnshaw, here and there varied to Catherine Heathcliff, and then again to Catherine Linton. In vapid listlessness, I leant my head against the window and continued spelling over Catherine Earnshaw, Heathcliff, Linton, till my eyes closed. But they had not rested 5 minutes when a glare of white letters started from the dark as vivid as spectres. The air swarmed with Catherines, and rousing myself to dispel the obtrusive name, I discovered my candle wick reclining on one of the antique volumes and perfuming the place with an odor of roasted calfskin. An abundance of Catherines. I snuffed it off very ill at ease, under the influence of cold and lingering nausea, sat up and spread open the injured tome beneath. It was a testament in lean type, and smelling dreadfully musty. The fly leaf bore the inscription, Catherine Earnshaw, her book, and a date some quarter of a century back. I shut it and took up another, the other, and another, till I examined all. Catherine's library was select, and its state of dilapidation proved to be well used, though not altogether for legitimate purpose. Scarcely one chapter had escaped pen ink commentary, at least the appearance of one, covering every morsel of blank that the printer had left. Some were detached sentences, other parts took the form of a regular diary scrawled on an informed childish hand. At the top of the next page, quite a treasure, probably, when first lighted on, I was greatly amused to behold an excellent caricature of my friend Joseph, rudely yet powerfully sketched. An immediate interest kindled within me for the unknown Catherine, and I began forthwith to decipher her faded hieroglyphics. An awful Sunday commenced the paragraph beneath. I wish my father were back again. Hindley is a detestable substitute. His conduct to Heathcliff is atrocious. H and I are going to rebel. We took our initiatory step this evening. All day had been flooding with rain. We could not go to church, so Joseph must need get up a congregation in the garret, and while Hindley and his wife basked downstairs before a comfortable fire, doing nothing but reading their Bibles, I'll answer for it, Heathcliff, myself, and the unhappy ploughboy were commanded to take our prayer book and mount. We were arranged in a row on a stack of corn, groaning and shivering, and hoping that Joseph would shiver too, so that he might give us a short homily for his own sake. A vain idea. The service lasted precisely 3 hours, and yet my brother had the face to exclaim when he saw us descending, "What, done already?" On Sunday evening we used to be permitted to play if we did not make such noise. Now a mere titter is sufficient to send us into corners. "You fret you have a master here," says the tyrant. "I'll demolish the first who puts me out of temper. I insist on perfect sobriety and silence. Oh boy, was that you? Francis, darling, pull the hair as you go by." I heard him snap his fingers. Pull his hair as you go by. Francis pulled his hair heartily and then went and seated herself on the husband's knee. And there they were, like two babies, kissing and talking nonsense by the hour, foolish palaver that we should be ashamed of. We made ourselves as snug as our means allowed in the ark to the dresser. I had just fastened our pinafores together and hung them up like a curtain, when in comes Joseph on an errand from the stables. He tears down my handiwork, boxes my ears, and croaks. "Some Meister Nobba just buried and Sabbath not owerded, and to sand to gospel still lugs, and yar there be lacking. Shame on ye, sit ye down, ill childer. There's good books enough if ye'll read 'em. Sit ye down and think o' your souls." Saying this, he compelled us to square our positions that we might receive from the far-off fire a dull ray to show us the text of the lumber he thrust upon us. I could not bear the employment. I took up my dingy volume by the scroop and hurled it into the dog kennel, vowing I hated a good book. Heathcliff kicked his to the same place, and then there was a hubbub. "Meister Hindley," shouted our chaplain. "Meister, come hither. Miss Cathy's riven the back off the helmet salvation. Heathcliff's paused his fit into the first part to Broadway on destruction. It's fair flaysome ut ya let him go on this gate. Ek, thou old man ut laced him properly, bud, he's gone." Hindley hurried up from his paradise on the hearth, and seizing us by the collar and the other by the arm, hurled both into the back kitchen, where Joseph asseverated old Nick would fetch us as sure as we were living, and so comforted we each sought a separate nook to await his advent. I reached this book and a plot of ink from a shelf, and pushed the house door ajar to give me light, and I have got the time on the writing for 20 minutes, but by comparison is impatient, and proposes that we should appropriate the diary woman's cloak, and have a scamper on the moors until it's sheltered. A pleasant suggestion, and then if the surly old man come in, he may believe his prophecy verified. We cannot be damper or colder in the rain than we are here. Maybe that's better. I suppose Catherine fulfilled her project, for the next sentence took up another subject. She waxed lachrymose. "How little did I dream that Hindley would ever make me cry so," she wrote. "My head aches till I cannot keep it on the pillow, and still I cannot give over. Poor Heathcliff. Hindley calls him a vagabond, and won't let him sit with us, nor eat with us any more, and he says he and I must not play together, and threatens to burn him out of our house if we break his orders. He has been blaming our father. How dared he, for treating H too liberally, and swears he will reduce him to his right place." I began to nod drowsily over the dim page. My eyes wandered from manuscript to print. I saw a red ornament title 70 times 7, and the first of the 71st. A pious discourse delivered by the Reverend James Banderham in the chapel of Gimmerden So. And while I was half-consciously worrying my brain to guess what James Banderham would make of his subject, I sank back in bed and fell asleep. Alas for the effect of bad tea and bad temper! What else could it be that made me pass such a terrible night? I don't remember another that I can at all compare with it, since I was capable of suffering. I began to dream almost before I ceased to be sensible of my locality. I thought it was morning, and I had set out on my way home with Joseph from a guide. The snow lay yards deep in our road, and as we floundered on, my companion worried me with constant reproaches that I had not brought a pilgrim's staff, telling me I could never get into the house without one, and boastfully flourishing a heavy-headed cudgel, which I understood to be so denominated. For a moment I considered it absurd that I should need such a weapon to gain admittance to my own residence. Then a new idea flashed across me. I was not going there. We were journeying to hear the famous James Banderham preach from the text 70 times 7, when either Joseph the preacher or I had committed the first of 71st, and were to be publicly exposed and excommunicated. We came to the chapel. I have passed it really in my walks twice or thrice. It lies in a hollow between two hills, an elevated hollow near a swamp whose peaty moisture is said to answer all the purpose of embalming of the few corpses deposited there. The roof has been kept whole hitherto, but as the clergyman's stipend is only £20 per annum, and a year in a house with 2 rooms threatens speedily to determine into one, no clergyman will undertake the duties of pastor, especially as it's currently reported that his flock would rather let him starve than increase the living by 1 penny from their own pockets. However, in my dreams, James had a full and attentive congregation. He preached, good God, what a sermon, divided into 490 parts, each fully equal to an ordinary address from the pulpit, and each discussing a separate sin. When he searched for them, I cannot tell. He had his private manner. Where he searched for them, I cannot tell. He had his private manner of interpreting the phrase, and it seemed necessary that the brother should sin different sins on every occasion. They were the most curious character, odd transgressions I never imagined previously. Oh, how weary I grew, how I writhed and yawned and nodded and revived, how I pinched and perked myself and rubbed my eyes and stood up and sat down again. I nudged Joseph to inform me if he would ever have done. I was condemned to hear all out. Finally he reached the first of the 71st. At that crisis a sudden inspiration descended on me. I was moved to rise and denounce James Vanderham as a sinner of the sin that no Christian need pardon. Sir, I exclaimed, sitting there within these 4 walls at one stretch, I have endured and forgiven the 490 heads of your discourse. 70 times, 7 times have I plucked up my hat and been about to depart. 70 times, 7 times have you prosperously forced me to resume my seat. The 491st is too much. Fellow martyrs, have at it. Drag him down and crush him to atoms, that the place which knows him may know him no more. Thou art the man, cried James after a solemn pause, leaning over his cushion. 70 times, 7 times did thou gapingly contort thy visage. 70 times 7 did I take counsel of my soul. Lo, this is human weakness. This also may be absolved. The first of the 71st is come. Brethren, execute upon with the judgment written. Such honor have all saints. With that concluding word, the whole assembly, exalting their pilgrim staves, rushed round me in the body, and I, having no weapon to raise in self-defense, commenced grappling with Joseph, my nearest and most ferocious assailant, for his. In this confluence of the multitude, several clubs crossed. Blows aimed at me fell on another sconces. Presently the whole chapel resounded with rappings and counter-rappings. Every man's hand was against his neighbor, and Banderham, unwilling to remain idle, poured forth his zeal in a shower of loud taps on the board of the pulpit, which responded so smartly that, at last, to my unspeakable relief, they woke me. And what was it that had suggested the tremendous tumult that had played James' part in the row? Merely the brand of a fir tree that touched my lattice as the blast wailed by, and rattled its dry cones against the panes. I listened doubtingly an instant, detecting the disturber, then turned and dozed and dreamt again, if possible still more disagreeable than before. This time I remembered I was lying in the oak closet, and I had distinctly the gusty wind and the driving of the snow. I heard also the fir bough repeat its teasing sound, and ascribed it to the right cause. But it annoyed me so much that I resolved to silence it if possible. Then I thought I rose and endeavored to unhasp casement. The hook was soldered into the staple, a circumstance observed by me when awake but forgotten. I must stop it nevertheless, I muttered, knocking my knuckles against the glass, and stretched an arm out to seize an importunate branch, instead of which my fingers closed on the fingers of a little icy cold hand. The immense horror of nightmare came over me. I tried to draw back my hand, but the hand clung on to it, and an almost melancholy voice sobbed, "Let me in, let me in." "Who are you?" I asked, struggling meanwhile to disengage myself. "Catherine Linton," it replied, shiveringly. Why did I think of Linton? I had read Earnshaw 20 times for Linton. "I'm come home. I had lost my way on the moor." As it spoke, I discerned obscurely a child's face looking through the window. Terror made me cruel, and finding it useless to attempt shaking the creature off, I pulled its wrist in onto the broken pane, and rubbed it to and fro until the blood ran down and soaked the bedclothing. Still it wailed, "Let me in," and maintained its tenacious grip, almost maddening me with fear. "How can I?" I said at length. "Let me go if you want me to let you in." The fingers relaxed. I snatched mine through the hole, hurriedly piled the books up in the pyramid against it, then stopped my ears and excluded the lamentable prayer. I seemed to keep them closed above a quarter of an hour, yet the instant I listened again, there was a doleful cry moaning on. "Begone!" I shouted. "I'll never let you in. Not if you beg for 20 years. "It's 20 years," mourned the voice. 20 years. I've been away for 20 years. Thereat began a feeble scratching outside, and the pile of books moved as it thrust forward. I tried to jump up, but could not stir a limb, and so yelled aloud in a frenzy of fright. To my confusion, I discovered the yell was not ideal. Hasty footsteps approached my chamber door. Somebody pushed it open with a vigorous hand, and the light glimmered through the squares to the top of the bed. I sat shuddering yet and wiping the perspiration from my forehead. The intruder appeared to hesitate and muttered to himself. At last he said in a half-whisper, plainly not expecting an answer, "Is anyone here?" I considered it best to confess my presence, for I knew Heathcliff's accent, and feared he might search further if I kept quiet. With this intention, I turned and opened the panels. I shall not soon forget the effect my action produced. With this Heathcliff stood near the entrance in his shirt and trousers, and with a candle dripping over his fingers, and his face as white as the wall behind him. The first creak on the oak straddled him like an electric shock. The light leaped from his hole to a distance of some feet, and his agitation was so extreme that he could hardly pick it up. "This is only your guest, sir," I called out, desirous to spare him the humiliation of exposing the cowardice further. "I had the misfortune to scream in my sleep, owing to a frightful nightmare. I'm sorry I disturbed you." Oh my God, confound you, Mr. Lockwood. I wish you were at the," commenced my host, setting the candle on a chair because he found it impossible to hold it steady. "And who showed you up to this room?" He continued, crushing his nails into the palm and grinding his teeth to subdue the maxillary convulsions. "Who was it? I've got a mind to turn them out of the house this moment. It was your servant Zillah," I replied, flinging myself onto the floor rapidly, resuming my garments. "I should not care if you did, Mr. Heathcliff. She richly deserves it." "I suppose that she wants to get another proof that the place was haunted at my expense. Well, it is swarming with ghosts and goblins. You have reason in shutting it up. I assure you no one will thank you for a doze in such a den." "What do you mean?" asked Heathcliff. "And what are you doing? Lie down and finish out the night, since you are here. But for heaven's sake, don't repeat the horrid noise. Nothing could excuse it unless you were having your throat cut." And the And the little fiend that got in at the window, "She probably would have strangled me," I returned. "It's not going to endure the persecutions of your hospitable ancestors. Was not the Reverend James Branderham akin to you on your mother's side, and the minx, Catherine Linton, or Earnshaw, or however she was called? She must have been a challenging, wicked little soul. She told me she had been walking the earth these 20 years, a just punishment for her mortal transgressions, I have no doubt." Scarcely were these words uttered when I recollected the association of Heathcliff's with Catherine's name in the book, which had completely slipped from my memory. Till thus awakened, I blushed my consideration, but without showing further consciousness of the offence, I hastened to add, "The truth is, sir, I passed the first part of the night in," here I stopped afresh. I was about to say perusing these old volumes. Then it would have revealed my knowledge of their written as well as their printed contents, so correcting myself I went on, "and spelling over the names scratched on that window ledge, a monotonous occupation calculated to set me asleep like accounting or—" "What can you mean by talking in this way to me?" thundered Heathcliff with savage vehemence. How dare you?" Under my roof. God, he's mad to speak so, and he struck his forehead with rage. I did not know whether to resent his language or pursue my explanation, but he seemed so powerfully affected that I took pity and proceeded with my dream, affirming I had never heard the appellation of Catherine Linton before, but reading it over had produced an impression which personified itself when I had no longer my imagination under control. Heathcliff gradually fell back into the shelter of the bed as I spoke, finally sitting down, almost concealed behind it. I guessed, however, by its irregular and intercepted breathing, that he struggled to vanquish an access of violent emotion. Not liking to show him, I heard the conflict. I continued my toilet, rather noisily, looking at my watch and soliloquized on the length of the night. Not 3 o'clock yet. I could have taken oath it had been 6 times stagnant here. We must surely have retired to rest at 8. Always at 9 in winter, and always rise at 4, said my host, suppressing a groan, and, as I fancied, by the motion of the shadow arm, dashing a tear from his eyes. Mr. Lockwood, he added, you may go into my room. You'll only be in the way, coming downstairs so early, and your childish outcry has sent sleep to the devil for me. And for me, too, I replied. I'll walk in the yard till daylight, and then I'll be off, and you need not dread a repetition of my intrusion. I am now quite cured of seeking pleasure in society, be it country or town. A sensible man ought to find sufficient company in himself. Delightful company, muttered Heathcliff. Take the candle and go where you please. I shall join you directly. Keep out of Mount Sentinel there. Oh, keep out of the yard, though. The dogs are unchained, and the house, Juno mounts sentinel there. Nay, you can only ramble about the steps and passages, but away with you. I'll come in 2 minutes. I obeyed so far as to quit the chamber when ignorant where the narrow lobbies led. I stood still and was witness, involuntary, to a piece of superstition on the part of my landlord, which belied oddly his apparent sense. He got on to the bed and wrenched open the lattice, bursting as he pulled at it into an uncontrollable passion of tears. Come in, he sobbed. Cathy, do come. Oh, do once more. Oh, my heart's darling. Hear me this time, Catherine. At last the spectre showed spectre's ordinary caprice. It gave no sign of being, but the snow and wind whirled wildly through, even reaching my station and blowing out the light. There was such anguish in the gush of grief that accompanied this raving that my compassion made me overlook its folly, and I drew off, half angry to have listened at all, and vexed at having related my ridiculous nightmare, since it produced that agony. Though why was beyond my comprehension. I descended cautiously to the lower reaches and landed in the back kitchen, where a gleam of fire, raked compactly together, enabled me to rekindle my candle. Nothing was stirring except a brindled gray cat, which crept from the ashes and saluted me with a querulous meow. 2 benches, shaped in sections of a circle, nearly enclosed the hearth. On one of those I stretched, and Grimalkin mounted the other. We were both of us nodding ere anyone invaded our retreat, and there it was, Joseph, shuffling down a wooden ladder that vanished in the roof through a trap. The ascent to his garret, I suppose. He cast a sinister look at the little flame, which I enticed to play between the ribs, swept the cat from its elevation, and bestowed himself in the vacancy, commenced the operation of stuffing a 3-inch pipe with tobacco. My presence in his sanctum was evidently esteemed a piece of impudence, too shameful for remark. He silently applied the tube to his lips, folded his arms, and puffed away. I let him enjoy the luxury unannounced, and after sucking out the last wreath and heaving a profound sigh, he got up and departed as solemnly as he came. A more elastic footstep entered next, and now I opened my mouth for a good morning, but closed it again, the salutations unachieved, for Hareton Earnshaw was performing his orisons sotto voce, and a series of curses directed against every object he touched, while he rummaged a corner for a spade or a shovel to dig through the drifts. He glanced over the back of the bench, dilating his nostrils, and thought as though of exchanging civilities with me as though with my companion the cat. I guessed by his preparations that egress was allowed, and, leaving my hard couch, made a movement to follow him. He noticed this and thrust at an inner door with the end of his spade, imitating by an inarticulate sound that there was the place where I should go if I changed my locality. It opened into the house, where the females were already astir, Zillah urging flakes of flame up from the chimney at a colossal bellows, and Mrs. Heathcliff kneeling on the hearth, reading a book by the aid of the blaze. She held her hand interposed between the furnace heat and her eyes, and seemed absorbed in her occupation, desisting from it only to chide the servant for covering her with sparks, or to push away a dog now and then that snoozed its nose over forwardly into her face. Snoozled. I was surprised to see Heathcliff there also. He stood by the fire, his back towards me, just finished a stormy scene to poor Zillah, who ever and anon interrupted her labor to pluck up the corner of her apron and have an indignant groan. "And you worthless," he broke out as I entered, turning to his daughter-in-law and employing an epithet as harmless as duck or sheep, but generally represented by a dash. "There you are, you idle tricks again. The rest of them do earn their bread. You live on my charity. Put your trash away and find something to do. You shall pay for the plague you have of having you eternally in my sight. Do you hear, damnable jade?" "I'll put my trash away because you can make me if I refuse," answered the young lady, closing her book and throwing it on the chair. "But I'll not do anything, though you should swear your tongue out, except what I please. Heathcliff lifted his hand, and the speaker sprang to a safer distance, obviously acquainted with its weight. Having no desire to be entertained by a cat-and-dog combat, I stepped forward briskly, as if eager to partake the warmth of the hearth, and innocent of any knowledge of the interrupted dispute. Each had enough decorum to suspend further hostilities. Heathcliff placed his fist out of temptation in his pockets. Mrs. Heathcliff curled her lip and walked to a seat far off, where she kept her word by playing the part of the statue during the remainder of the stay. That was not long. I decided joining their breakfast, and at the first gleam of dawn took an opportunity of escaping into the free air, now clean and still, and cold as impalpable ice. My landlord hallooed for me to stop ere I reached the bottom of the garden, and offered to accompany me across the moor. It was well he did, for the whole hill back was one billowy white ocean, the swells and falls not indicating corresponding rises and depressions in the ground. Many pits, at least, were filled to a level, and entire ranges of mounds they refused of the quarries, blotted with the chart with my yesterday's walk left pictured in my mind. I had remarked on one side of the road, at intervals of 6 or 7 yards, a line of upright stones continued through the whole length of the barren. These were erected and daubed with lime on purpose to serve as guides in the dark, and also when a fall like the present confounded the deep swamps on either hand with the firmer path. But excepting the dirty dot pointed up here and there, all trace of the existence had vanished, and my companion found it necessary to warn me frequently to steer to the right or left when I imagined I was following correctly the windings of the road. We exchanged little information. He halted at the entrance of Thrushcross Park, saying I could make no error there. Our adieu was limited to a hasty bow, and then I pushed forward, trusting to my own resources, for the porter's lodge is unattended as yet. The distance from the gate to the Grange is 2 miles. I believe I managed to make it 4. What with losing myself among trees and sinking up to the neck in snow, a predicament which only those who have experienced it can appreciate. At any rate, whatever were my wanderings, the clock chimed 12 as I entered the house, and they gave exactly an hour for every mile of my usual way from Wuthering Heights. My human fixture and the inner satellites rushed to welcome me, exclaiming tumultuously they had completely given up. Everybody conjectured that I perished last night, and they were wondering how they set about search for my remains. I bid them to be quiet. Now they saw me return, and benumbed to my very heart, I dragged upstairs, whence, after putting my dry clothes and pacing to and fro 30 or 40 minutes to restore the animal heat, I had adjourned to my study, feeble as a kid, and almost too much so to enjoy the cheerful fire and smoking coffee which the servant has prepared for my refreshment. Chapter 4. Chapter 5 is very short. It's only 4 pages. What vain weathercocks we are, I, who have determined to hold myself independent of all social intercourse, and thanked my stars that, at length, I had lightened on a spot where it was next to impracticable. I, weak wretch, after maintaining till dusk a struggle with low spirits and solitude, was finally compelled to strike my colours, and under pretence of gaining information concerning the necessities of my establishment, I desired Mrs. Dean, when she brought in supper, to sit down while I ate it, hoping sincerely she would prove a regular gossip, and either rouse me to animation or lull me to sleep by your talk. You have lived here for a considerable time, I commenced. Did you not say 16 years? 18, sir. I came with the mistress, was married, to wait on her. After she died, the master retained me for his housekeeper. Indeed, there ensued a pause. She was not a gossip, I feared, unless about her own affairs, and those could hardly interest me. However, having studied for an interval with a fist on either knee and a cloud of meditation over her ruddy countenance, she ejaculated, "Ah, times are great changed since then." "Yes," I remarked. "You've seen a great many alterations, I suppose." "I have, and troubles too," she said. "Oh, I'll turn the talk on the landlord's family," I thought to myself. "A good subject to start on that pretty girl, widow. I should like to know her history, whether she be a native of the country, or, as is more probable, an exotic that the surly indigene will not recognize for kin." With the intention, I asked Mrs. Dean why Heathcliff let Thrushcross Grange and preferred living in a situation and residence so much inferior. "Is he not rich enough to keep the estate in good order?" I inquired. "Rich, sir," she returned. "He has, nobody knows what money, and every year it increases. Yes, he's rich enough to live in a finer house than this, but he's very near, close-handed, and if he had meant to flit to Thrushcross Grange as soon as he heard of a good tenant, he could not have borne to miss the chance of getting a few hundred more. It is strange people should be so greedy when they are so alone in the world. He has a son, it seems. Yes, he had one. He is dead. And the young lady, Mrs. Heathcliff, she is a widow? Yes. Where did she come from originally? Why, sir, she is my late master's daughter. Catherine Linton was her maiden name. I nursed her, poor thing. I did wish Mr. Heathcliff could remove here, and then we might have been together again." "What, Catherine Linton?" I exclaimed, astonished, but a minute's reflection convinced me it was not my ghostly Catherine. "Then," I continued, "my predecessor's name was Linton?" "It was." "And who is that Earnshaw, Hareton Earnshaw, who lives with Mr. Heathcliff? Are they relations?" "No, he is late Mr. Linton's nephew." "The young lady's cousin, then?" "Yes, and the husband was her cousin also, one of the mothers. The other on the father's side. Heathcliff married Mrs. Linton's sister. I see the house at Wuthering Heights has Earnshaw carved over the front door. Are they an old family?" "Very old, sir, and Hareton is the last of them, as our Miss Cathy is one of us, I mean of the Lintons." "Have you been to Wuthering Heights? I beg your pardon for asking, but I should like to hear how she is." "Mrs. Heathcliff, she looked very well and very handsome, yet I think not very happy." "Oh dear, I don't wonder. And how did you like the master?" "A rough fellow, rather." "Mrs. Dean, is not that his character? Rough as a scythe and hard as whinstone. The less you meddle with him, the better. He must have had some ups and downs in life to make him such a troll. Do you know anything of his history? It's a cuckoo's, sir. I know all about it, except when he was born and who his parents were and how he got his money at first. And has been cast like an out-fledged dunnock. The unfortunate lad is the only one in his parish that does not guess how he has been cheated. Well, Mrs. Dean, it will be a charitable deed to tell me something of my neighbors. I feel I shall not rest if I go to bed soon, so be good enough to sit and chat an hour. Oh, certainly, sir. I'll fetch a little sewing, and then I'll sit as long as you please. But you've got cold, and I see you shivering, and you must have some gruel to drive it out. The worthy woman bustled off, and I crouched near the fire. The heat felt hot, and the rest of me chill. Moreover, I felt I was excited, almost to a pitch of foolishness, through my nerves and brain. This caused me to feel not uncomfortable, but rather fearful, as I am still of serious effects from my incidents of today and yesterday. She returned presently, bringing a smoking basket and a basket of work, and having placed the corner of the hob, drew in the seat, eventually pleased to find me so companionable. Evidently, before I came to live here, she commenced, waiting no further invitation to her story. I was almost always at Wuthering Heights, because my mother had nursed Mr. Hindley Hernshaw, that was Hareton's father, and I got used to playing with the children. I ran errands too, and I helped to make hay and hung above the farm for anything that anyone would set me to. One fine summer morning, it was the beginning of harvest. I remember Mr. Earnshaw, the old master, came downstairs just for a journey, and after he had told Joseph what was to be done during the day, he turned to Hindley and Kathy and me, for I sat eating my porridge with them, and he sat speaking to his son. Now, my bony man, I'm going to Liverpool today. What shall I bring you? You may choose what you like. Oh, one let it be little, for I shall walk there and back 60 miles each way. That is a long spell. Hindley named a fiddle, and then he asked Miss Kathy. She was hardly 6 years old, but she could ride any horse in the stable, and she chose a whip. He did not forget me, for he had a kind heart, though he was rather severe sometimes. He promised to bring me a pocket full of apples and pears, and then he kissed the children goodbye and set off. It seemed a long while to us all, the 3 days of his absence, and often did little Kathy ask when he would come home. Mr. Earnshaw expected him by supper by the third evening, and put the meal off hour after hour. There were no signs of his coming, however, and at last Tom got tired of running to the gate to look. There it grew dark. She would have had them to bed, but she begged sadly to be allowed to stay up. And just about 11 o'clock, the door latch was raised quietly, and in stepped the master. He threw himself into a chair, laughing and groaning, and bid them all stand off, and he was nearly killed. He would not have such another walk for 3 kingdoms. And at the end of it, to be flighted to death, he said, opening his greatcoat, which he held bundled under his arm, see here, wife, I was never so beaten with anything in my life, but you must and take it as a gift of God, though it's a dark, almost as if it came from the devil. He crowded round and over Miss Kathy's head. I had a peep at a dirty rag, black-haired child, big enough both to walk and talk. Indeed, its face looked older than Catherine's, yet when it set to its feet, it only stared round and repeated over and over again some gibberish that no one could understand. Nobody could understand. I was frightened, and Mr. Earnshaw was ready to fling it out the door. She did fly up, asking how he could fashion to bring the gypsy brat into the house when they had their own bairns to feed and fend for, what he meant to do with it, and whether he were mad. The master tried to explain the matter, but he had really half dead with fatigue. he was really half dead of fatigue, and all that I could make out amongst her scolding was a tale of her seeing it starving and houseless and as good as dumb in the streets of Liverpool, where he picked it up and inquired for its owner. Not a soul knew to whom it belonged, and he said, and his money and time being both limited, he thought it better to take it home with him at once than run into vain expenses there, because he was determined he would not leave it as he found. Well, the conclusion was that my mistress crumbled herself calm, and Mr. Earnshaw told me to wash it and give it clean things and let it sleep with the children. Henley and Kathy contented themselves with looking and listening till peace was restored. Then both began searching their father's pockets for the presents he had promised them. The former was a baby of 14, but when he drew out what had been a fiddle crushed to morsels in the great coat, he blabbered aloud, and Kathy, when she learned that Master had lost her whip and attending to the stranger, showed her humor by grinning and spitting at the stupidest little thing, and earning for her pains a sound blow from her father to teach her cleaner manners. They entirely refused to have it in bed with them, or even in the room, and it had no more sense, so I put it on the landing on the stairs, hoping it might be gone on the morrow by chance, or else, attracted by hearing its voice, it crept to Mr. Earnshaw's door, and there he had found it on quitting his chamber. Inquiries were made as to how it got there. I was obliged to confess, and in recompense for my cowardice and humility was sent out of the house. That was Heathcliff's first instruction to the family. On coming back a few days afterward, for I did not consider my banishment perpetual, I found they had christened him Heathcliff. It was the name of a son who died in childbirth, and it served him ever since, both for Christian and surname. Heathcliff. Monomer. Is that what it's called, like Beyonce? Miss Cathy and he were now very thick, but Hindley hated him, and to say the truth, I did the same, and we plagued and went on with him shamefully, for I wasn't reasonable enough to feel my injustice. The mistress never put in a word on his behalf. When she saw him wronged, he seemed a swollen, patient child, hardened perhaps to ill treatment. He would stand Hindley's blows without winking or shedding a tear, and my pinches moved him only to draw in a breath and open his eyes if he had hurt himself by accident. Nobody was to blame. This endurance made old Earnshaw furious when he discovered his son persecuting the poor fatherless child, as he called him. He took to Heathcliff, strangely believing all he said. For that matter, he was precious little, and generally the truth, and petting him up far above Cathy, who was too mischievous and wayward for a favourite. So, from the very beginning, he bred bad feeling in the house, and at Mr. Earnshaw's death, which happened in less than 2 years after, the young master had learned to regard his father as an oppressor rather than a friend, and Heathcliff as an usurper of the parents' affections and his privilege, and he grew bitter with brooding over these injuries. I sympathized a while, but the children fell ill of the measles, and I had to tend them and take on me the cares of a woman. At once I changed my ideas. Heathcliff was dangerously sick, and while he lay at the worst, he would have me constantly by his pillow. I suppose he did. I suppose he felt I did a great deal for him, that he hadn't wit to guess that I was compelled to do it. However, I will say this: he was the quietest child that ever a nurse watched over. The difference between him and the others forced me to be less partial. Cathy and her brother harassed me terribly. He was so uncomplaining as a lamb, though hardness, not gentleness, made him give little trouble. He got through, and the doctor affirmed it was in a great measure owing to me, and praised me for my care. I was vain of his commendations, and softened toward the being by whose means I earned them, and thus Hindley lost his last ally. Still, I didn't dote on Heathcliff, and I wondered often what my master saw to admire so much in the sullen boy, who never, to my recollection, paid his indulgence by any sign of gratitude. He was not insolent to his benefactor. He was simply insensible, though knowing perfectly the hold he had on his heart, and conscious he had only to speak, and all the house would be obliged to bend to his wishes. As an instance, I remember Mr. Earnshaw once brought a couple of colts at the parish fair, and gave the lads each one. Heathcliff took the handsomest, but it soon fell lame, and when he discovered it, he sent it to Hindley. "You must exchange horses with me. I don't like mine, and if you won't, I shall tell your father of the 3 thrashings you've given me this week, and show him my arm, which is black to the shoulder." Hindley put out his tongue and cuffed him over the ear. "You'd better do it at once," he persisted, escaping to the porch. They were in the stable. "You will have to, and as I speak of these blows, you'll get them against the interest." "Off, dog!" cried Hindley, threatening him with an iron weight used for pounding potatoes and hay. "Throw it," he replied, standing still, "and then I'll tell how you boasted that you would turn me out the doors as soon as he died, and see whether he would not turn you out directly." Hindley threw him, and hitting him on the breast, and fell he down, but staggering up immediately, breathless and white, and had not I prevented it, he would have gone just so to the master, and got full revenge by letting his condition plead for him in imitating who had caused it. "Take my colt, gypsy, then, and young Earnshaw, and I pray that he may break your neck. Take him, and be damned, you beggarly interloper, and wheedle my father out of all he has, only afterwards show him what you are, imp of Satan, and take that. I hope he'll kick out your brains." Heathcliff had gone to lose the beast and shift it to his own stall. He was passing behind him when Hindley finished his speech by knocking him under its feet, and without stopping to examine whether his hopes were fulfilled, he ran away as fast as he could. I was surprised to witness how coolly the child gathered himself up and went on with his intentions, exchanging saddles and all, and then sitting down on a bundle of hay to overcome the qualm which the violent blow occasioned. Before he entered the house, I persuaded him easily to let me lay the blame of the bruises on the horse. He minded a little what tale was told, since he had what he wanted. He complained so seldom, indeed, of such stirs as these, that I really thought him not vindictive. I was deceived completely, as you will hear. And that is the end of chapter 4. Next we'll go over chapter 5 and chapter 6, both of which are very short, only 12 pages in total. Chapter 7 as well is very short. I'll probably read chapters 5, 6, and 7 at the same time, because that's about 23 or 23 pages. Good. We're a good chunk of the way through. I'm excited to continue reading.